Hello everyone, Fro here. Welcome to today's presentation. So in today's presentation, we're going to be diving deep and talking about a very fascinating topic, and that is data literacy. Data literacy. We all know we live in a world of abundant data, and a lot of people are using data for their advantage, but some people are using data for not so good purposes. All right, we might hear of terms like data weaponization, all right, where people are weaponizing data. What does that mean? They're doing using fake data, all right. They're using data to manipulate people, all right. And so we have to be educated about data enough with some form of literacy, all right, to prevent ourselves against this potential confusion or manipulation that can happen. So data literacy is a very, very important topic. But what is very fascinating, at least to me, as I kind of went down this path, I work with data quite a bit, is realizing that from the normal discussion or normal discourse, just as a society in general, very, very few people pay attention to data. Very few, very few. We all use data, we all create data, we all know we have data, we all know, potentially, I hope, that data is important. But yet, if you go in and you look at data and say, if data is that important, are people educated about it? All right, and you find that very few people, I don't have the exact statistics, are aware or competent using data, both from just a usage perspective, right, or an offensive perspective, or not to talk about defensive perspective. All right, and what do I mean? Are you using data the right way? All right, can you use data to your advantage if you had to from that? And that's what I mean by offensive perspective. Or can you use data for a defensive perspective? So if someone is trying to manipulate you using data, or sway you one way or another, which is happening quite a bit these days, right? Basically, fake news is all about just data for people, influencing people. Do you have the defensive postures needed to guard yourself against potential attacks or potential data manipulations that might be carried at you? So these are the things that we expect of people. But as far as I know, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there is no or there are very few curriculums that you go to school, to learn about data, all right, or to have, the data literacy, or to have data literacy, all right. And if you are aware of any curriculums, be sure to leave them in the comment section below so others can be exposed to it as they watch this video. But for the most part, people who end up being data literate are maybe data professionals, right? Maybe you're doing data science, you're doing machine learning, you're doing big data, databases, data warehousing, all right? Or you work for some analytic company. But, well, if that's the only people that understand data, it's just akin to finance, right? We all realize that, and this is a complaint that a lot of people have had, where people who study finance are just the ones that maybe go to school, the ones that, maybe do accounting. But then you get up and when you try to go buy a house, right, you start hearing all the finance terms that makes you scratch your head and say, but how come they didn't teach me all of these things in school, right? And you start hearing all those terms. And so we know that's a problem in society. I think data literacy is, positioning itself to be that kind of a problem, where we're going to have a lot of data, but then also have a majority of people who don't understand how to use data, or how to access data, and how to be defensive for themselves against data manipulation, which is very, very, very easy to do if you want to try. All right, and a lot of people are falling victims to data manipulation from data scammers. All right, so this is why this talk is important. This is why I wanted to make this video. I don't know how long the video would be, but if you want to take any takeaway from this, is we live in a data age, and as a result, if there's anything that's valuable as much as data is, be rest assured that there are people who want to take advantage of it. all right, and maybe put you at a disadvantage, put your family at a disadvantage, put your school at a disadvantage, put your company at a disadvantage, put your country at a disadvantage, or your village at a disadvantage. And so it's very important that we pay attention to this and start asking ourselves, am I data literate enough? Do I have enough literacy and competency about data? If not, what can I do to change that, right? If not, what can I do to change that? How can I empower my employees to be more data literate? And this is even key for companies who want to use data to, increase the bottom line and such. All right, you have to be asking the questions as leaders. Are my employees data literate enough? And this is not just about can they read a spreadsheet or can they open up Excel. It goes way beyond that to think about data literacy. All right, do they understand data? Can they collect data? Can they use data effectively? So this takes us back into our regular screen here. And the key topics for us when we talk about data literacy is, I'm going to talk about this from a couple of areas, right? Number one, from a literacy perspective, is being able to access data. All right. A lot of people today, we have a lot of access to data, right? Facebook or within the organization, you might have a database or data warehouse or some reports, and people can have access to data. So I think that barrier is becoming less and less of a challenge, but it's something just to pay attention to. All right, can people have access to data? Do you have access to the data you need? Sometimes it could be challenging. Like you could be a researcher trying to find crime statistics in your area, and you realize that there's no way I can get that data, right? Or maybe the data is in some journal and you don't have access to that journal, or you need to pay to get access to it, something like that. So access could be easy sometimes, or it could be a challenge, but something to be aware of as you kind of build your data literacy competency, right? The next thing I'll pay attention to is, and this is one of the most important one, validating data, right? Validating anything anyone tells you. All right, whether it's a report, it's a statistics, it's something you watch on TV. If you don't validate, you can be swayed and confused and manipulated very easily. So this is, I'm going to list about 5 key criteria to pay attention to, but validating data would be one of the top ones. All right, a lot of people, you just give them data and they take it for what it is, and they don't have the sophistication or the skills to validate that. All right, does this data make sense? Does this statistics make sense? Or is what you're telling me correct? This report kind of looks like I should doubt this report, right? And you need some certain tools to be able to do that. And I'll share some examples here, all right? There is a statistics that 90% of statistics are false, all right? 90% of statistics are false. All right, including this one, I don't know. All right, but these are kind of the things that you could be you could start running into when you start working with data. All right, somebody will just look at this and say, oh, 90% of statistics are false, and they just believe it. All right, but if you think about it and you're data literate, you would understand what is going on here to say, if 90% of statistics are false, what is the likelihood of this statement being made to be true? It's a very tiny likelihood, and therefore this statement in itself could potentially be false. And so you cannot just afford to just take things and numbers at face value, right? Because someone will hear, oh, 90%, and they'll just assume that it's a big number. So if it says 90% of statistics are false, then it means that, all right, when they go out, every statistic should be false. So you need a certain level of sophistication to arm yourself against situations like this, to make sense of it, to understand what is going on. All right, so one area where people will use, let me actually write that, where people would use data for weaponization is a situation like this, right? They can just use numbers like this and confuse everybody. All right. Another thing to prevent yourself again about validating data or validating information or statistics is basically charts and graphs, right? This is something that a lot of people, they don't like words, so they might like charts and graphs. And so companies, they figure this out and they use it very well to confuse people if you're not aware. All right. So let's take an example here to, let's say I have a company and my company is selling stuff. I'm just going to draw a simple chart here. All right, let's say we had sales in 2017. All right, 2018, 2019, and say 2020. All right, 2020. So this looks like a legitimate graph I'm going to draw. Okay, so so this is a year, and then this is a sales, how much we sold, so sale amount. All right, a legitimate graph, and I can show that wow, sales are increasing a lot. All right, I can draw a graph like this. It's very steep, and the sales are increasing a lot. All right, and you look at it and say, all right, sales are increasing, but this would be actually useless if you don't ask the question, what is on this axis here? This is the x-axis. What is on this y-axis? All right, and if you realize that the y-axis, let's just say we put that as such, and you look at it and you realize that the x-axis is fine, but the y-axis, it went from 58, right, 0.5, 58.57, 58.5.75, and such. All right, you can see that the x-axis, the y-axis is just improving as such. All right, but this is tiny. So even though the graph, if you just looked at the graph when we looked at it initially, it seems like that company is really increasing their sales. But once you factor in the y-axis, you realize that not so much, right? 58.5 to 58.57 is 0.07. It's a very tiny increase, basically. All right, and so I can use this graph, or someone can use this graph to deceive you if you don't have the sophistication to ask, right? You always need to know what the y-axis is and what the x-axis is for any graph to be meaningful to you. All right, and so these are one of the ways that people can use data for weaponization. And even if they don't want to do just graphs and charts as such, all right, another way could just be just use plain English and still confuse you, right? And this is very true again for organizations or even businesses that want to talk about, or politicians even, that want to talk about or how good or how well they're doing. And they can say, you know what, you should invest in our stock because we doubled our revenue a year over year, right? We can say something like we double our revenue year over year, right? So year over year, we double the revenue. And you look at it and say, wow, this company is really growing. They're doing very well. They're going out and they're able to double their revenue year over year. And it sounds interesting unless you go in and ask, but what was the revenue last year, all right? And they tell you the revenue was 2% of, let's say, some other gross number, 2% of that, all right? And you guys double to what? To 4%, all right? You guys double to 4%, but that's still so small, right? If I just say double revenue, it might seem like, well, we did something amazing, but when your starting point is so small, right, it's easy to double. All right, it's easy to just double your numbers up if your starting point is that small. All right, and someone will call this a 100% growth, right? Doubling is basically 100% growth, but it's because the starting point is so small, it's easy to double your number. But if you're talking about, if you had huge numbers, doubling that would be even more of a challenge. So watch out for details like this. These are the kind of things that, again, under data literacy, we need to be able to be empowered to watch out for things like this. When people use statistics to maybe overemphasize something or underemphasize something, or just to completely lie, we need to be able to pay attention to something like this, all right? And that goes, again, under data literacy. It's just sad that there's very few classes that just teach people to be data literate, but these are the things that we need to be aware of, and such. I'll give one more example here, which could be another interesting example of correlation, all right? How we interpret the data we're giving. Correlation, all right? And especially false correlations. You can draw correlation to almost anything, all right? And then people have to ask, does correlation equals causation? All right, does correlation equals causation? One of the most popular one I know, and I'm sure you can come up with a lot of examples on this, is hospitals, all right? Where people talk about the likelihood of people dying in hospitals. So people are more likely to die in hospitals. All right, this is an interesting one, right? Because you look at it and say, somebody comes up to you and say, do you know that people are more likely to die in hospitals? All right, that's interesting, and that's kind of eye-opening to you. And you say, by the way, look at it, 98% of people who die, 98% of people who die were in hospitals. All right, we can even go that further. So people who die are more likely to die in hospitals. And look, 98% of the people who die in hospitals. And without the right data literacy and competency, you can start looking at this and having the wrong impression in your head to say, well, if that's the case, we need to shut down hospitals. Shut down hospitals. All right, because hospitals could be killing centers, right? If 98% of people who die are dying in hospitals, why the heck are we having hospitals open? It shouldn't be open. That should be abominable that hospitals are still open. That's the kind of false correlation you can draw if you just look at statistics that have been manipulated to confuse you. Because what is going on here is you're assuming that correlation equals causation. All right, and that's a huge thing with data, where people always usually bring data to imply that, let me write this here as such, that correlation equals causation. All right, and this is one of the ways that data gets manipulated, but that's not always the case. Just because two things are correlated doesn't mean there's any causation that has been established in there. And if you just even using pure intuition, you realize that, well, people who go to the hospitals are people who are already sick in the first place, and so they are more likely to die. And so it just happens that that's because they're sick, and that's where sick people congregate. Of course, sick people unfortunately die, and so if they die at hospitals, that's what we're seeing. We're not seeing the fact that 98% of people die at the hospital, meaning that everyone, you should be scared of hospitals in any way. So data could be manipulated to get us confused, and we have to be data literate to prevent ourselves against things like this, right? If I was to maybe ask more questions, the bigger question would be, what is the percentage of healthy people who go to hospitals that die? All right, if healthy people went to hospitals and were dying at a higher rate, then we could say, all right, there is something there to look at. All right, but if you're just looking at sick people who go to hospital and they die, that then you cannot really draw any important, meaningful conclusion from something like this. All right, you could look at it to say, what are the percentage of sick people who go to the hospital and die versus sick people who stay at home, and do they die or not? All right, maybe something would be relevant there to look at, because now you're looking at the same population size, the same sample size, but you cannot use a population of sick people who go to the hospital and die and then try to infer anything from that to the general population that includes sick and non-sick people. So just understanding your population size and what it is you're dealing with would be very crucial, all right, for you to prevent yourself from being from falling under the victim of data weaponization. And again, I don't talk about politics on this channel or anything like that, but there are a lot of people out there that have very, very strong incentives to sway you one way or another, all right? Whether we're talking about police, crime statistics, we're talking about climate change and weather, we're talking about trade and sales, and how companies, or how countries do business, and those kind of statistics. People will present you with all kind of data, and it's up to you to be data smart, data literate, to look at it and say, all right, does this crime statistics make sense, right? What are the contexts here? Are we looking at the same population size? Does correlation equals causation? And start asking those questions for you to understand what is going on. And same thing with climate change. If a politician comes and wants you to vote for their tax bill, you have to start asking these questions, looking at the graphs they show you to make sure that they're not fooling you. All right. Understanding the way they use terms. Are they just using doubling and more kind of funny words to hide something behind, or are they really being truthful? So just because the politician doubled, uh, some, money for a project doesn't mean that they did anything significant, because if that money was already small, then doubling that is just like, no, 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 no. We actually want you to do it bigger, right? So you can prevent yourself. And then, of course, correlation doesn't equals causation kind of scenario. So I can go on and on and on with lots and lots of examples as such, and I'm sure if you're watching this video, you probably have seen examples as such. So something to be very, very aware of under that concept of data literacy. Then the number 3 piece here, which would be one of the pillars of the data literacy, once we can access data, validate that data, all right, and then it's just using data. All right, it's just using data. How do you talk to people in data? Do you understand the data you're working with? Do you understand the tools for working with data, right? Spreadsheets, databases, etc, right? Do we have an understanding of all of that? Again, the goal here is not that we all have to go out and be experts at using data and doing pivoting and all of that, but do we have the bare minimum competency? If we want to validate data, or if you doubt any of the statistics, can I go reproduce it myself? Can I go get the raw data and try to make sense of it myself? All right, so we need the competencies around being able to use data. That is key. All right, that is key, because just looking at something that somebody gave you, if it's misleading, you want to be able to go back and dig a little bit deeper. So being able to use data of all forms, right? We're talking about structured data, files, videos, charts and graphs, whatever comes your way, we want to be able to use that competently. Number 4 area to pay attention to is using data. Sharing data is important as well. All right, and this is something that we also have to be aware of, both at the individual level and at the organizational level. So as an individual, you have some data set. Can you share that data with somebody else? Do you know how to share the data? Whether talking about emailing them the number, sending them a report. For organizations, it's a little bit different, because you're talking about how do you collaborate, right? Do you have a portal where people can go to find data? Do you have a data catalog for discovery? Do you have all of those things in place to make sure people can access, use, validate, and share that data? So something to be very, very important about. All right, and then I'll do number 5, and then there is a number 6 here that will be the crowning jewel. All right, number 5 is disposing of data. All right, we know that data is, they say data is the new oil, and we use it. If you've ever gone to or done an oil change yourself, maybe at home, one of the things you realize is when you change your oil and you take it out from the pan, if you drain it yourself, that thing is very toxic, right? The last thing you want to do is to take the oil, go to your garbage can, and dump it in there, right? Because that's just going to pollute the environment. It's going to be bad for the environment. And so people do not do that. All right, you want to take that oil, go to a place that's dedicated for people who know how to dispose of that competently, so it doesn't pollute the environment. Same thing with data. Data is valuable. All right, if you have data, it has your social security number, it has address information. All right, for a lot of people, it has their health information. Do we understand how to dispose of all this data so that the bad guys don't go out and get all your personal information to go out and start creating accounts and doing malicious stuff? So just being able to be competently able to understand the data you have and understand the processes involved for disposing of that data is crucial. Now, each individual or each company or each kind of data you're working with would have different regulations or different requirements attached to that. So you have to be able to dispose of that data with with the mindset or cognizant of the fact that you're meeting the requirements or you're meeting any laws and regulations attached to that data. All right. There are some data sets that make sense for you to just delete it. If I have if my friend sends me a picture and I look at it and I want to keep it on my phone, I can keep it. If I don't want to, I can delete that image from my phone. All right. That might be work for me working with a friend, but if you're working for an organization and they send you a critical report, maybe you're working for the government, you might or might not have the right to delete that, right? And if you delete that, that might be destroying of evidence or something like that. So we have to be always very cognizant of not just how we dispose data or how not just how we use data, but how we dispose data. All right, and even going down into the weeds, right? Because have you watched the news of stories of people who maybe committed a crime and they deleted the files from their computers, and they thought that, oh, I deleted this file from my computer, so I'm all good, right? And they realize that the FBI comes in, they pick up the laptop and they go out and they're able to do some forensics and they can get those files back. All right, and you're scratching your head. It's like, did I really delete the files or not? Well, you really did not, because when you, again, depending on what you're doing, if you delete the file from the computer or you delete that data or you're disposing of that data, it doesn't mean the data goes away. All right. And I don't want to go into the details of that, but it's basically, if the file has been written to your computer disk, deleting it simply just removes a pointer to that disk and makes it available. The data is still there, but it just simply removes that pointer that tells you that there is a file there. The data is there, it's available to be rewritten over, and unless you rewrite over that, something new, someone can still go by using some really sophisticated tool and read that data. All right, so just because you press delete doesn't mean your data has been disposed of. So there are efficient ways to effectively dispose of data, whether we're talking about digital data or we're talking about data on pieces of paper that you need to go and shred and do things like that. So very important to educate or to be competent around disposing data. And then last but not least, I promised this was going to be the coup de grace for this concept, and that is the idea of governance. All right, and this is becoming more and more and more important. I just cannot emphasize how this is being important. Everything we're talking about at some point would be going under this umbrella of governance and regulations. Companies, organizations, countries, country blocks, right, like the EU, and all of them are poised to pass regulations around data one way or another, right? We know of GDPR, right, in Europe. We know of CCPA in the US, and there are many, many more like this that are being passed. And so whether you are an individual, you have rights to your data, all right? And you need to understand what those rights are. What does GDPR mean for you, right? What can you legitimately call a company and tell them to do or not to do with your data? You have those rights, you have those privileges and CCPA. And if you don't know of those rights and privileges, that is your personal problem, all right? And you deal with those consequences. It's just like you cannot break the law or allow somebody to violate your law and blame it on ignorance, right? Ignorance is not an excuse for not following the law or breaking the law or having somebody abuse your laws and your rights. So being able to be educated about all of this is a feat in itself, and it's very, very important, in this day and age where we're talking about data literacy and making sure that people understand what kind of data they have, what they're allowed to do with that data, what others are allowed to do with their data, and what steps they can take to mitigate anyone using or abusing their data. All right. So hopefully this was helpful. I know I kind of went and covered a lot of topics, starting up with this whole idea of data is a new oil, and people are trying to manipulate data or weaponize data or use data in offensive and defensive postures, and also going through the key areas for data literacy, and how you can use that to educate and empower yourself. All right, so this is Thru. Hopefully this was helpful. Share this with somebody that might get value out of it. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to go into the comment section below and leave that. I'll be more than happy to respond to that. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.